Oh, hey there. Welcome. My name is Ryan, but you also might know me as Yoko. I'm one of the tournament organizers for the Splatoon scene here in Calgary, and what you might not know is that over the last year, I've spent a bit of my time learning how to mod and build handheld game systems like the Game Boy, Game Gear, even the WonderSwan here. And what I'd love to share with you today is how to go through in modding and building your very own Game Boy Advance. So I hope you're enjoying the Capsule Series so far. I know I sure am. And I'm really excited to share this all with you here today. Now, honestly, before a year ago, I really didn't know anything about taking anything apart. I'll be honest, it was really challenging for me. I even had systems that I'd tried to open up, I'd completely failed at. I didn't know what I was doing. And so I'd actually sent a few of those systems off to a friend to see if he could fix them up. And he sent everything back working perfectly, except for my Game Gear, which didn't work properly. And apparently, when I did a little bit of searching, it turned out I needed to do some soldering and replace the capacitors in the Game Gear. If you have an old Game Gear and it doesn't turn on properly, 90% of the time, it's probably going to be those capacitors that have just failed over the past few years. Now, I also had a project come up where I needed to repair an old computer that also had failed capacitors. And so I told myself, either I've got to find an expert who knows how to do this, or I can teach myself and do it myself. And honestly, after the last year of practice, I can look back and say that simply soldering capacitors is actually pretty easy, but I sure didn't feel that way back when I started. So what I'd love to do today is explain with you some of the basics of what we need to do to build and modify a Game Boy Advance. Now, my first project was a Game Gear, and honestly, as a first project, I think that's a little intimidating. I wish I would have started with a Game Boy Advance. By the time I got to the GBA, I was probably 3 or 4 consoles in, and honestly, I think this is one of the easiest, simplest projects that you can start out with. So that's what I'd love to share with you all here today. I want to go over first some of the tools and the equipment that I brought out here with me, and some of the parts that I've ordered and where I got them from. So, getting started here, I have my blue work mat. These aren't essential, but I find they're really useful when you have compartments for screws and tools, and just a nice space that you can work on. Now, I also have here a 3D printed shell that I got off of Thingiverse that I can keep my Game Boy Advances in as I'm working on them. Again, this is totally optional, but if you do a few of these, it definitely helps to have something keeping that Game Boy steady and locked in place. What else do we have here? Well, I've got a battery tester, and so this is just a AA battery tester with some alligator clips on it. We'll be using that in a little bit. Again, this is totally optional, but you'll see why we need it when we need it. And what else do we have for tools? A couple things here. Off to the side, I've got my soldering iron. We're going to be using that in a little bit. And I've got my screwdriver kit. This one's the iFixit kit. It comes with pretty much every screwdriver tip you'd ever need, so I fully recommend that. But you don't need that specific kit. Any tri-wing screwdriver will get us into the Game Boy Advance. Now, the tri-wing screwdriver is essential for this project. We can't get into the Game Boy Advance without it. However, the soldering is actually going to be optional, and I'll explain that as we get into our build. So far, we have a few optional things that we need. The mat, the shell, the battery tester, our soldering iron, and then we also have the mandatory, the screwdrivers that will be needed. Now, a few other optional things that I have here as well. I've got some isopropyl alcohol. That's going to be useful for cleaning out the inside of the Game Boy. I've got some Kapton tape, and this stuff is really useful when you are securing elements inside. I would say out of anything, I definitely would recommend getting the Kapton tape out of the optional things, but again, it is optional for this build, and we'll get through that as we work on. Now, what else do we have here? Well, we've got all of the parts that we're going to be using. So I have 2 different shells. We're going to be doing a mix and match on our shells. These shells were purchased from Retro 6. I also have the screen, the ribbon cable, and some cables we'll be using for soldering. Those were all purchased from Funny Playing. I've got a mounting bracket, or an aligning bracket. That's going to be used for making sure the screen sits firmly in the shell. This was custom done from Retro 6. It's a really handy part. It is optional, and Funny Playing will give you some of their own mounting brackets as part of the kit, but I really like this one specifically. And then we have all the buttons and membranes, and these ones are all from Funny Playing. We've got a USB-C rechargeable battery pack from Retro 6, and we also have some custom printed stickers and a white Game Boy Advance glass lens that we're going to be putting on. So ultimately, what we're doing in this build is we're giving it brand new case, brand new screen, brand new buttons, brand new battery, brand new glass lens. Aside from essentially the motherboard that drives the Game Boy, this is going to be completely rebuilt from the ground up. So I'm really excited to jump in. But before we get building, let's take a look at the existing Game Boy that we have. Now this one is in pretty poor shape. The screen has lots of scratches on it. The back case is missing its battery cover, and it is just covered in goop from what looks like is Scotch tape that was held across the back, probably keeping those batteries in place. Now you do need to have a working Game Boy Advance for this build to work, and so I'm just going to quickly test it out with some AA batteries here. And turn it on. That is a super nostalgic sound. Well, now that we know that this works, let's take it apart. So I'm going to put this face down in my bracket here, and let's grab a screwdriver that we're going to need. So I'm going to open up my iFixit screwdriver kit, and I'm going to grab 2 screw bits. I'm going to grab a small Phillips and a tri-wing bit, as well as the screwdriver itself. Now, getting into a Game Boy Advance is going to require getting through 6 tri-wing screws and a few Phillips screws. Tri-wing screws, we have 2 on the top. Come on, you. There we are. 2 in the top middle, and then there's going to be 2 on the bottom here. Now, this Game Boy, we're actually going to be giving away to one lucky Capsule viewer here. And if you are interested in winning this Game Boy after we're done building it, I want you to use the code !Gameboy in the Twitch chat there, and you will get all the information about what you need to do to enter to win this build. Of course, if you have an old Game Boy Advance sitting at home yourself, this is super easy to build and modify yourself, as long as you have the right parts and some of the essential tools that I recommend here. All right. So now that our 6 tri-wing screwdrivers are out, we're going to move on to the small Phillips screw. And I'll swap my head. That lives in the battery compartment here on the Game Boy Advance. Perfect. Now that that's all done, we can actually just lift off this back shell, and we can get into the main Game Boy unit here. Now, what's important to note is there are 3 screws and a ribbon cable. The 3 screws are attaching the motherboard into the console, and they're all Phillips heads. They're all along the middle of the console here, so I'm just going to quickly undo those and pull them out. Now, the other component that's used here is a ribbon cable that's attaching the display to the motherboard. Now, this ribbon cable is very easy to pop out, but I am going to use an optional tool. Now, this actually came in an iFixit kit, but this is a little spudger, and I like the pointy end on this that I can just pop open the little gray hooks that are next to the ribbon cable. And once those are popped out, I can now lift up. I'm going to lift out by the cart slot here. Just lift out that motherboard and gently pull it out from the rest of the shell. And you can see here the display coming in from the screen here. It's coming in just through this one ribbon cable. And essentially, we don't need anything here anymore. As we said, we are going to be replacing the screen, the lens, the buttons, pretty much everything in this. Now, some people will choose to keep the membranes of the Game Boy. So they like the way the original rubber membranes feel. So maybe you want to pull those out. I'll leave that up to you. But all we really need is just this motherboard component. Now, the motherboard component is easy enough to work with, but something I like to do before I really go further with any specific work is actually cleaning it down with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. So I'm just going to go in with a Q-tip and some isopropyl alcohol and give a clean off to the different button contacts there. We've got the up, down, start, select, as well as the A and B button contacts. And this one's looking like it's in pretty good shape here. So I won't do any more than just a quick polish off. But definitely, the Game Boy now, well, I guess this is almost 20 years old or over 20 years old at this point. I find a lot of these, after some time, do acquire a bit of just dust and gunk that gets built up in the systems. So, again, totally optional if you're going to use the isopropyl alcohol and the Q-tips, but I fully do recommend giving a bit of a clean out inside to the motherboard once you get a chance. Now, for this capsule Game Boy, we're going to be mixing the clear and the blue shells. And I think we should do something like this. A clear front with a blue back. How does that look? I think that's pretty neat. I'm going to set these other parts of the shell aside. Maybe we'll build a reverse capsule Game Boy one of these days. We'll leave those over there for now. And with this, we're going to be putting the bottom part in first, and we're going to build upwards as we go. So I'm going to set this down in my shell there. And we're going to start adding in some of the components that we'll need in this build. So first is the light pipe. Now this you can actually take from the old console, but a lot of these new shells will come with them. This is basically the little diffuser that the LED, your battery LED, will shine through. I always forget to put these in, so I make a note of putting that in as like one of the first things I do when I'm assembling here. Now, what else are we going to need to put in? Well, we've got space for our buttons and our D-pad. So I'm going to grab that D-pad and the membranes. And I'm going to put in the A and B buttons here. And the A and B buttons have little notches, so there's no way you can put them in incorrectly. They will only fit in one way. And so you'll know you'll get those in perfect every time, which is nice. And then there's the membrane for the A and B buttons. Perfect. If I flip that over, oh, the light pipe just fell out. You can kind of see how the buttons are going to look here. I think this will look really, really cool. Put that back in. Now, the next thing I like to do is work with the screen. Now, I want to talk about this screen for a second, because this is just really cool technology that I think has come out in the last few years. So we saw before on the previous Game Boy that it had that ribbon cable that was connecting to the display. Now, what you look at here is we have the screen and a separate ribbon cable. Now the screen here attaches just on a little connector here on the bottom corner. And these screens are mass-produced. They're not specifically for the Game Boy Advance. They're just mass-produced, cheap LCD electronic screens that you can get. Now, the ribbon cable here, this is custom-fitted for this Game Boy. Now, the ribbon cable is basically turning a signal that this screen is reading into a signal that the Game Boy can read, and it uses the same kind of ribbon cable as the Game Boy Advance. So, when you look at the components, you might think that the screen is the expensive component, but actually the ribbon cable is where you put most of the cost in a project like this. And there's a lot of chips on this ribbon cable that just create that signal that make it work just beautifully clean. So we're going to be using both the ribbon cable and the display here, obviously, in this build. But something that I think is always important to do before you start out actually assembling these pieces together is just test and make sure that the display and the ribbon cable are all talking properly to the Game Boy Advance. And that's where this battery tester comes in. So I'm going to set my batteries here Put in our negative and our positive. There we go. Get our little alligator clips, and we'll clip on the negative on the bottom terminal here. And the red on the positive terminal here. This is basically just us putting in batteries in the Game Boy. Now that we've done that, I'm going to attach the display to the ribbon cable. And there's a little firm connector here that you just want to snap into place. And it's a little bit delicate. You do want to be careful with these ribbon cables. They are very fragile, and so they can bend and tear if you're not too careful with them. So I've snapped the display into place. And now I'm going to take the ribbon cable. There we go. And I'm going to attach that carefully into where the ribbon cable originally was. And I'll just push those little connectors down with my finger, but I could do that with the spudger as well. There we go. So, realistically, this is our Game Boy. We've got power, we've got the motherboard, and we've got the display. So, fingers crossed. Let's turn on the power switch here. Perfect. And we'll turn that off. So now we know for a fact that all of the components individually are working. If we have to do some troubleshooting later on, maybe we assemble it and things don't turn on, then we know that it's not the screen or the ribbon cable, but maybe there's something in our power that we didn't screw together the console tight enough. It's not making a full circuit or something else, right? It can help us out a lot with troubleshooting when we know all the things are working properly. So I'm going to take my batteries out of those terminals here for now. I'll unclip those alligators. Set that off just to the side. Perfect. So now we know everything is working properly. I think we can start assembling and building this. So I'm going to pop out that ribbon cable from the motherboard. Set the motherboard over here for a moment. There we go. And what I'm going to do next here is these come with a protective peeling film. I'm going to reuse this peeling film, but I want the LCD, I want the screen to be in the console with the film off. So I'm going to peel that off and immediately set that in the console. Now what I like to do is actually just go underneath the Game Boy here and reapply a little bit, just that sticky protective layer. What I find this is going to help with is if I accidentally touch the screen from underneath here, I'm just touching that protective film while the screen is properly installed in the shell here. All right, now we're going to get to the scariest part of this whole build. I'm going to bring out that S word, soldering. And as I said, this is going to be completely optional depending on how you want to progress with your build here. Now, what you'll notice is the screen, like any smartphone display, is going to have different brightness levels. Now, to control those brightness levels, you're going to need to be able to press the L or the R trigger on the Game Boy, as well as the select button. You hold that down with your L and R, and that's going to adjust the brightness. Now, it can't adjust the brightness unless you actually wire some cables from the display ribbon cable to the actual motherboard for it to register those brightness changes and those buttons being pressed. So this is a really, really easy solder. And honestly, if you've never done soldering before, this is probably one of the easiest things you could do. So I really do encourage you to try. But if you just want to have the brightness set at a neutral level, this stage is totally optional. But I'm going to show you here just to show you how easy it is. So I've got a USB-powered soldering iron, but I recommend looking at all soldering iron options. This one here is the TS80, and it's a nice little compact soldering iron, which I really like. But yeah, you can get Weller soldering irons or some really affordable soldering irons just online or at your local hardware store. Once the soldering iron has heated up, can take a little bit of my solder and apply some blobs to the pads here marked L, R, and select. So let's just do a small dot there, small dot there, and a small dot there. There we go. And we've put 3 small dabs of solder on the ribbon cable. Now I'm going to take my wires, and we're just going to solder each wire to each ribbon cable. I'll start with the select wire. You just heat up just the smallest little bit of solder will do it. You really don't need much on this. Heat up the select one, and then R. And then our L trigger. Perfect. Super simple. We're done with that for now, so I'm going to unplug my iron. We'll set it aside. And now that I have those cables soldered into place here, I'm going to start to affix some things. I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using some of this Kapton tape. And this is, again, I'm going to say semi-optional. Now, some kits are actually going to come with an adhesive sticker that applies on the back of this display. The kit that I'm using doesn't have that right now, so I'm actually going to put some tape on the back of this display here to act as an insulator. Now, the back of the display is metal, and there are some different pin connectors on my ribbon cable here, and I don't want those pin connectors interfering with the metal and causing a short. And the reason there's actually 2 different pin connectors is you'll notice there's pins on this side and pins on this side. There's actually 2 different models of Game Boys. So this kit is built for all models of Game Boy Advance, but depending on how many pins you have, you might be using this part of the ribbon cable or that part of the ribbon cable. So we are using this wider part of the ribbon cable. I believe that is the 40-pin connector versus the narrower part is the 32-pin connector. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one last piece of Kapton tape here. Now that I've insulated the back, I'm also going to just tape the ribbon cable in place and put a little bit of tape over the pins that I'm not using either. And this is just going to keep that nicely lined up in the spacing that I want it to appear in. I'll take my wires that I soldered in. We're just going to move those up and out of the way here for now. And now I'm going to use this mounting bracket that I mentioned earlier. This mounting bracket is super useful for lining up and keeping the screen in place. Now, you want the screen to be pushed up into the top right-hand corner as far as it can go. And this bracket, I'm just going to push down on the bracket gently while pushing the screen up and to the right, just in this bottom corner with my spudger. Once I know that the bracket is like securely in place, I'll be good to continue on with my build here. I think that's looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. We'll take our cables here, keep those neatly tucked away. And I think the last thing we have to put in this build here is going to be the start and select membrane. I always like to put that in after I've assembled the ribbon cable there, because you'll see there's a little bit of space where the start and select is going over the ribbon cable there, just on my right side. Anyways, that's looking really good for me. You can optionally as well put in the Lnr triggers here. I find getting the Lnr triggers to sit just perfectly well, there's like one little lined spot they need to fit in, can be a bit tricky. So you might choose to put those in here now. See if I can get this one in. Or you can put them in later. The springs on those will always push back though, so they can be a little bit of a nuisance to get lined up properly. This one seems to be fitting well though. And we'll do our right trigger here as well too. We'll line that up. Perfect. those are pressing nicely. Cool, well, look at that. Our parts are slowly disappearing off of this mat here. We now need to solder a few more cables onto the Game Boy Advance itself, onto the motherboard. And we mentioned we need to solder the L, R, and select buttons. Now, this, I'm going to route the cables up and around here first. Now, the first cable I have is the select cable, and that's going to go on the reverse side of the Game Boy here. And it needs to be soldered onto the marker here. It needs to be soldered onto the marker labeled TP2. So I'm going to grab my iron. We're going to quickly solder that one on. We're going to need to solder to TP2. TP2 is a test pad for the select button. And so when the select button is pressed, TP2 is also registering that. So I'm going to quickly just put the smallest bit of solder on that test pad TP2. And then I'm going to take the select cable and make sure that that's firmly fixed to that solder spot. I'm going to flip over the Game Boy here, and I've got two more cables to solder. These are going to be for the Lnr Triggers. So I'm going to route those up to the triggers that I need them to be on. Let's see. The top one is going to be my right trigger, which will be on my left side as we are looking reverse on this Game Boy. We'll route that in appropriately. And these ones we're just going to directly solder to the shoulder button pads themselves. Now again, if you're looking for an exact guide on this, I do recommend following along in the instructions provided in with the kit, just so you know to solder to exactly the points you're wanting to go onto properly. Let's get this last one in here. I'm going to route that cable right through this little hole on the cartridge slot. There we go. And then we'll solder that to the trigger here inside. I might need a little bit more solder. Just put a dab of solder on my iron. And I find with soldering, it's easy to overuse your solder. A little goes a long way. Just the smallest amount will make a big difference. And when I can tug on the cable and know that it's not moving out anywhere, then I know I've secured that in place properly. Perfect. I'm going to unplug the iron one more time. Give it a little bit of a clean there. And that is all of the soldering that we are doing today. So we literally just soldered 3 cables. We wanted to go from point A to point B 3 times. Super, super easy. And again, that part is totally optional. So don't let that soldering scare you if you don't have the tools. Really, the only essential tool is that tri-wing screwdriver. Everything else here is more or less optional, but it definitely will make your life a lot easier when you start working on these. All right, so I am going to drop this motherboard into place. And I'm going to make sure that the speaker lines up. There's a little notch on the speaker, and this is, again, where that spudger tool definitely helps out. Just making sure that that little notch on the speaker lines into the hole that it's meant to fit in. Now, we're almost there. We're almost there. We just need to screw everything in together and make sure all the buttons are properly seated. So I'm going to attach this ribbon cable, and attaching it just the same way we undid it there. Just gently push it in and clip those little gray hinge clips into place. I don't know, hinge clip probably isn't the technical term for it, but it's what I'm calling them right now. And then we can screw the motherboard into place. Now, this kit came with its own screws, so I'm going to use the screws that were provided in my kit. And I'll put in the 3 screws originally to seat the motherboard where they were. 1, 2, 3. And again, these ones are all going to be Phillips head. In fact, every screw I'm using at this point forward is going to be a Phillips head screwdriver. So you really only need the tri-wing screwdriver for taking out the 6 initial screws that you have to get into. So now that that's assembled appropriately, I'm going to put in the edges. I do like that the edges are always also customizable. There's a lot of color options you can do on Game Boys, and I'd love to see some of the ideas that you've come out with in building. I've got some ones here, like this is a custom printed front panel. This is the Pug Dog Advance we built here. We've also got a boxy pixel aluminum shell with aluminum buttons. This one's really weighty. And so there's lots of different color options and combination options you can do when you're building Game Boys. So yeah, customize your trim, customize your buttons, customize the membranes, the shells. Build your own Game Boy. So now, last but not least, is screwing on the back plate. Oh, and actually, I don't want to forget the power switch. Power switch just sits in there on the power slider now that everything is screwed in together. So I'm just going to set on this back plate, and it should gently fall and fit into place if we've lined everything up properly. And look at that, it does. This is looking really, really nice so far. Now I need to screw this all into place. So of course, I'll put that back in my tray. Grab my screwdriver and essentially reaffix the 6 screws back where they came from. Now I'm actually just going to put in 3 initially here, so we can just quickly test and make sure that, again, everything is still working properly. I'm going to take my batteries here and put them in the console properly, and just do one more quick power test before we button everything back up properly. Perfect. It's looking beautiful. Now that we know everything is working, let's do our last few steps. So we're just going to finalize all these screws. Make sure everything gets nice and secure. And then we're almost done. The last things are going to be cosmetic. So we're going to have the glass lens to put on and some custom stickers for the back. Additionally, we still have that USB-C battery. And honestly, this is one of my favorite mods that you can do just because of how easy it is. If you have a Game Boy Advance that you don't want to do any other mods on, but you want to put in a USB-C rechargeable battery, this is literally just a drop-in solution. All right, all of our screws are nicely affixed in there. I am happy with that. So what I'm going to do here is apply the battery in. And so there's a little battery contact that we can just take out from the shell. The battery just drops in. And again, if we go to turn it on, it's getting power beautifully. Now, I also got a separate back plate that's got a USB cutout hole for the battery. So I can simply line that up and snap that shut. And now we have a perfectly flush USB-C port for charging. Let's plug that in and see how it works. We've got a light indicating that we're charging up, and we're all good to go. Perfect. So 2 more cosmetic things. We've got the stickers on the back, and then a glass lens on the front. I'm going to do the glass lens here, and this is a bit of a tricky part because you don't want to get any dust or fingerprints in between the lens and the screen. Now remember, I still have that film that I'd applied on the screen from earlier. So I'm going to peel off all the sticky backing from the lens here. Lift that right out. Peel off the sticker, showing the adhesive behind it. And then peel off the protection sticker that was on the LCD and just set that aside. Now this just goes in flush with the front of the display, and that looks beautiful. And this is a tempered glass display, so it'll be a lot more resilient than the standard plastic displays that came originally on this console. Brilliant. So now all we need to do is potentially one of the hardest parts of this whole mod, applying the stickers. Now I'm actually going to get out my tweezers for this, just so I can line up the stickers exactly perfectly. We've got these gorgeous custom capsule stickers. Here, take a look at those. We've got these gorgeous custom capsule stickers that are going to be going on this, and for one lucky winner, you'll get to appreciate this in person yourself. So again, !Gameboy in the chat and see how you can win this for yourself. So I'm going to line up the capsule one. Oh gosh, beautiful. Right on the back there, and adhere that into place. And then we've got our last sticker to go on here. And again, just use those tweezers. Oh, I think we got it. Beautiful, beautiful. All right. All right, so with the stickers on, we're ready to test it out one last time. Let's put in Metroid Fusion, a classic. What a beautiful game. I know I'm really excited for Metroid Dread, but of course, all of the 4 other Metroid games leading up to it are just as good, and reliving Metroid Fusion or even Zero Mission on a Game Boy Advance like this is a totally different experience than what you grew up with. What are some of your favorite Game Boy games? You know, this last year, I've been playing a lot of the Pokemon series as well as Mega Man Battle Network. If you're interested in seeing some of those games played out, come by my stream, twitch.tv/AkaMaple. I also do stream a lot of building projects as well, and I'm always open at questions if you have them. But yeah, simply giving this a quick test out, everything looks and feels great. All the buttons are quick and responsive, the screen looks brilliant, and I'm really happy with the build. Perfect. Well, let's set this down here with some of our other Game Boys and wrap up. So, I want to thank you all for spending your time with me here today, and I hope you're really enjoying the Capsule Series. Again, if you'd like to ask me any questions about this whole process, feel free to give me a ping over in the Alberta Esports Discord. My name's Yoko, so I'm pretty easy to find. Or you can come by my stream, and that's just twitch.tv/AkaMaple. And anytime you're there, I'm happy to answer questions about, well, Game Boy games in general, or how you can go through with any of these builds yourself. Anyways, thank you so much for your time and for watching today. And again, if you're interested in winning this Game Boy, !Gameboy is all you need to put in, and that'll get you all the information you need to know. Anyways, thanks again. Take care. My name has been Ryan, or Yoko, and I hope to see you tomorrow in the Splatoon tournament. So I'll be hosting that as well too. It's well worth watching. If you love kids and squids and all sorts of Splatoonery, it's going to be a lot of fun. Come check that out. Anyways, take care. We'll see you again.